What's up guys, Lifting here. In this video I'm going to give you a breakdown of the Winter Orb Inquisitor that I have been playing, and this is going to function as a build description guide, but I'm a little careful using the word guide because if you are new to the game, I will probably start by just giving this fair warning here that this is probably not the best build for you. There's a lot of advanced gear setup that makes this feel good, and if you are new this may be a little overwhelming, and I'm not sure you're gonna get the best experience. If you are experienced and know how to craft and you know how to spend your currency and all that stuff, then I think you're gonna be pretty happy and satisfied with this build. But otherwise, maybe check out the Elementalist versions of Winter Orb, as they are more beginner friendly. They are typically cheaper to get up and running to, and yeah, you're probably gonna have a better time with that if you are less experienced with the game. I just wanted to get that out of the way so you don't come back and blame me if you if it's not running for you. I've played this character for a very long time now. It's currently level 95 in the Betrayal League, and it's gone through so many iterations. I started by wanting to do Zealot's Oath together with Mind Over Matter, so I could force regen via that means, but like always, I just really hate Zealot's Oath as it prevents life regeneration from happening, and it just doesn't feel great, especially in some boss fights too, such as the Uber Elder fights, where there is degen going on and such. So eventually I decided to spec out of Zealot's Oath and find another way of sustaining energy shield without having to rely on the regen. And I've managed to do that now. It feels pretty good. I'm very happy with the build as it is right now. I've done all the content on it, and it's probably one of the strongest builds that I've played. But it's still a softcore build, at least if you play in Betrayal. But I guess anything will humble you in Betrayal, with the Syndicate boys just being so damn dangerous when you're playing tier 15, tier 16 maps with some damage modifiers and such. If Haku catches you off guard, well, you're going to Pound Town, right? Either way, let's get into the guide, and let's first talk about why I chose the Inquisitor and what I've picked for him. So the reason for the Inquisitor was because during the beginning of Betrayal League, everyone seemed to go with the Elementalist version, and I kind of understand that for the sake of League starter builds, Elementalist just makes a little more sense there. It's less demanding. However, some were also saying that Winter Orb didn't have that great single targets, and I wanted to make sure that if I were playing Winter Orb, then at least I wanted to get the best single target as possible, because I cannot stand playing builds that don't have proper single target, and you are engaging with the boss and then you can't really finish the boss off fast enough, and you have to portal in and out like a million times to get it to work. It just feels bad. It slows you down, and I don't know, for me it makes me feel like I'm playing like an incomplete build, unless the build, of course, is specifically designed to just be a complete map clearer with no incentive killing bosses. Then it's fine, but in this case I wanted something that could do both, and the Inquisitor, when you look at the numbers, is able to reach the best boss killing damage, and that's partly due to, or in big part due to Inevitable Judgment, which we have here. Critical strikes ignore enemy monster elemental resistances. So this means that we don't have to focus on getting a ton of minus elemental resistances via curses or elemental equilibrium or something like that, right? I don't think you would use elemental equilibrium, but that's another matter. But you get the point. We don't have to focus on reducing the resistances. So instead of using Cold Penetration as a support gem, right, we can use something else that gives us more damage in that setup. Also, I wanted something that was fast, and since I wanted to use Shield Charge for my setup, which is an attack, then Instruments of Virtue just works really well because of the increased spell damage. If we've cast a spell, first of all, it goes to our Winter Orb, And then the increased attack speed if you've attacked recently, that's 20%. So when you move around, when you're attacking with shield charge, that increases your cast speed of Winter Orb. And the way Winter Orb works is basically like a channeling skill. You can see it up here, it charges up. I have 12 charges right now. That's because I have the Helmet Enchant that gives me 2+ to maximum stages. This is best, for any of you guys who have played before, this is best compared to Blade Vortex, which has a similar mechanic, although Blade Vortex in itself is not considered a channeling spell. So when we hold our button down, it will charge up. When we then use the attack here, which will proc the Instruments of Virtue for more cast speed, will cast it faster, right? It's one of the nice things about it too. So what you want to have in order to make Winter Orb feel good to use is an adequate amount of increased duration so that the charges don't degen too fast. And you want to have an adequate amount of cast speed so that when you have to charge up the Winter Orb to get the charges up and running, then you don't have to stand still for too long because your cast is slow. And for the more stacks you have, the higher projectile hit frequency you're going to have. And that's why the extra 2 charges you can get on the helmet is very powerful damage-wise. So basically, the more you have, the more often your Winter Orb is going to shoot out and deal more damage. It also lasts longer the more charges you have on it. I think it's 0.4 per charge. So the more charges you have up when you start moving around, the longer it's going to last. So you preferably want to keep it at, you don't want to run around at the low charges because it's going to have less frequency shot, but it's also going to last for a shorter duration. So good cast speed, good increased duration, and I'll show you how we achieve that in just a bit. But let's quickly talk about the other spells or skills that I use besides Winter Orb before we just talk about how we scale it all. So in order for all of this to work here, I'm also running 3 Heralds and I'm running Discipline. And I have Discipline down here together with an Enlighten level 3 and Herald of Thunder and Herald of Ice. Then over here I have my Herald of Ash. And it makes good sense for my Voidbringers because they have plus to level of socket elemental gems. So both my Herald of Thunder and the Herald of Ice, which gives like flat increased damage, they gain very well from this, or we get a lot of value from this. But in order to run them all together with Discipline, I need to have my Enlighten level 3 at least, and then I need to have 5% reduced mana reserved on my helmet. And you can get that via the Essence. Oh, I can't remember what the name is now. One sec, let's quickly check in the stash so you guys can see it. It's the Essence of Loathing. It needs to be top tier, but then it will give you minus or 5% reduced mana reserved, and you can run it all together with the level 3 Enlighten. Alternatively, you can just use a level 4 Enlighten, but it's pretty expensive, right? We're gonna go back to the fireplace. And that makes it so that we reserve pretty much all of our mana. We have 10 mana left here. It is a mind over matter build, but we're using our energy shield, and I'll show you how we do that in just a sec. Then I'm of course using my shield charge up here together with 45 faster attacks and calling strike. And one thing that's an issue is that when you are at very high content, like tier 15 and above, then because we don't have a lot of accuracy, you can see 58% chance to hit, then you're not guaranteed that if you're fighting something that you shield charge into it, that it's going to apply the 45. But it's just something we have to accept, and sometimes you just have to keep charging into it. It's not the end of the world either, because when your Winter Orb is up and running, it's still going to deal damage if you charge into them a couple of times until it procs. At lower level content, it's very reliable and it's not an issue. But to of course increase the rate at which we can use our shield charge, this is just a normal one, right? But we use a Quicksilver Flask because movement speed also influences how fast we can use a shield charge. But we use it with faster attacks, of course, and it's very nice with quality for the extra attack speed it gives, but also calling strike, and this is completely optional. You could use another 4th gem setup if you prefer, but Culling Strike gives, with 20 quality, another 10% increased attack speed, so at least I thought it was worth taking into consideration. And then together with the shield charge, you may notice that there's some ice and an Orb of Storm sprung here, and that's because on my weapon I have crafted the trigger a socketed spell when you use a skill, or we've crafted the entire weapon, but if you are not ready to craft this type of weapon, then just go for the last one, the suffix trigger a socketed spell when you use a skill. Basically this works kind of like a Poet's Pen, so every time you attack, it will trigger whatever you have socketed into this weapon. However, unlike Poet's Pen, this has a 5-second cooldown, so you can't like spam it as you would with the Poet's Pen. But for that I then use Cold Snap, and Cold Snap I do because, first of all, it actually deals a decent amount of damage at level 20, but primarily because when we're then mapping, then when we kill stuff, you can see at the bottom of it, it says 25% chance to gain a frenzy charge when an enemy dies while in this skill's area. So we can generate frenzy charges with this. On top of that, I'm also using it with Orb of Storms and then power charge on critical. This is a very, very efficient way of generating power charges as the Inquisitor against bosses, and also of course when you're just mapping and such. And of course Cold Snap in itself, when that hits, if it crits, then it will also generate a power charge. So for me this works really damn well. Then to supplement the damage of my Winter Orb, I'm using Vol Righteous Fire. And unlike a normal Righteous Fire, this is not going to burn you to death, it's going to deal damage to you. It sacrifices 30% of your total energy shield and life when you activate it. And then you will get a heavy spell damage modifier, grants 39% more spell damage, as you can see here for mine. That translates to any other spell you're using, so for Winter Orb this applies, and it's obviously a very big damage increase. I've linked it with efficacy and increased duration, and I can see I haven't put quality on these. It's lagging. And the point of that is, of course, to just give Righteous Fire a longer duration so that we can use Winter Orb, or so our Winter Orb will deal more damage for a longer time. Finally, I'm using a Summon Lightning Golem, cast when damage taken, and Assassin's Mark setup. So when we take an adequate amount of damage, it will cast Assassin's Mark, give them that extra damage or higher chance to receive a crit, but also increase the damage they take from critical strikes. Lightning Golem is probably the best of the golems because it gives us attack and cast speed, which is very useful for both moving around and sustaining Winter Orb. The actual Winter Orb setup itself is Winter Orb, concentrated effect, added cold damage, cold to fire, efficacy, and greater multiple projectiles. And I've gotten this to level 21, the Winter Orb. I break 12 until I got it, so it was a rather expensive endeavor. But it's definitely worth it because it is the flat damage that keeps scaling. It gives a lot of extra damage eventually. Concentrated effect is probably it is the strongest damage multiplier you can use for the setup. And you don't really have to worry about the less area of effect that it grants. Originally I was actually scaling a lot of area of effect in both the skill tree, and I didn't want to use concentrated effect, but I then tried experimenting a little with it, and I honestly don't see any difference when it comes to or in practicality when it comes to mapping or bossing. You just get a lot more damage if you use concentrated effect, because the way Winter Orb works, when it shoots out projectiles, the projectile travel distance is not influenced by your area of effect. The only thing that's really affected by it is when the projectiles land on the ground and they explode. But even that, it's so very little. You really don't notice it. It's for that reason that we'll talk more about that later, but in the skill tree I used to have Amplify, I used to have Blast Radius, I even had a Carcass Jack going on for a while, which is 50% increased area of effect just by the Carcass Jack, plus the notables here. And when I removed all of that, I couldn't really tell any difference. It only allowed me to, or it allowed me to just use more powerful skill nodes, and it allowed me to use a different type of chest. So I wouldn't worry about that if I were you. I used the Cold to Fire support gem to convert 50% of the damage we deal from Winter Orb into fire. And there's a few reasons for that, but the main thing is that if we do that, then we can suddenly use Herald of Ash, because Herald of Ash only scales fire damage and physical damage, of course, too, but that's not relevant to us. So if we weren't at least converting some of it, we wouldn't be able to use Herald of Ash. It would be a waste. But another thing is also that we open up for the Snowforged notable up here to actually give us the double amount. So with fire and cold, we suddenly benefit from both of these increases here and into Snowforged. So not to mention that Cold to Fire in itself is a strong damage multiplier on its own, even if we weren't taking in Herald of Ash or Snowforged up there, because we also gain 29% of cold damage as extra fire damage. So it's not just the conversion that happens, but we also gain extra. Efficacy is for increasing the duration of it, and I use efficacy while I'm mapping, and then when I'm going against tough bosses, not really map bosses or anything like that, but if I'm going up against the Shape, or if I wanted to do Uber Elder or something like that, I would just do a quick swap and add in Elemental Focus. Elemental Focus is a huge damage increase, but it prevents our heralds from having that secondary effect because it prevents, I guess, ailments, right? And for mapping, having the Herald of Ash proc its Shatter, and the Herald of Ash proc its Burn, and I guess not too much the Herald of Thunder, but the Herald of Ash and the Herald of Ice, at least, the two secondary effects of those are very nice for map clearing and greatly speeds up your clear speed. So efficacy for mapping and elemental focus for bosses. And then of course, greater multiple projectiles. Greater multiple projectiles will reduce the damage each projectile deals, but you will shoot many more projectiles, and each of these projectiles can hit the same target. So the more projectiles you have, even though they deal less damage per projectile, it greatly makes up by having more projectiles being able to hit the same target. Let's talk about the skill tree real quick. The main thing you need to be aware of here, the main challenge with this entire build here, is to make it work with Eldritch Battery. So we spend our energy shield as a mana source instead of mana, and so that we have enough energy shield so that even in the highest level content we don't get completely drained and our mind over matter essentially becomes inefficient. Right now 30% of damage taken goes onto our energy shield instead of our mana due to Eldritch Battery. In order to make that work, I found that you, at least for tier 15 content and up, you at least want to have like 2600 energy shield. It's not that hard to get that amount. I don't even have anything that specifically scales energy shield in the tree besides just my two hybrid life clusters and hybrid life and energy shield, of course. And then, you know, decent amounts of energy shield on my gear, but it's really, you could get much higher energy shield than this without too much trouble. However, having enough energy shield, just a high enough pool, is not enough to sustain this when you take lots and lots of damage. But I'm going to show you how we sustain that as it is via the gear after we're done talking about the skill tree, because that is so very important. Otherwise this build is going to feel very bad playing. But in general, this is a build that relies on life. You can see that, of course, and I think it has around 201% life in its finished state, so it's nothing too insane, but at least you can still see we have 6,380 life with pretty decent gear, but nothing too insane. And then with the mind over matter effect that's get added to or that absorbs some of the damage we take, we get a pretty decently high efficient health pool. However, as I said, I am playing this in softcore, and I wouldn't play it in hardcore, because sometimes if the Syndicate boys have the right mods and you're doing high content, you just get deleted. And yeah, we skip the area of effects clusters. However, the thing that scales your damage the most, and also a big part why we're playing the Inquisitor, is of course critical strikes, and of course multiplier for that. So we pick up Annihilation in the crit cluster here, Doomcast in the multiplier over here. I went up and had this at some point, and it is pretty good for your damage overall, but I eventually went out of it and went down here and grabbed the duration cluster instead, because in practicality, if you're fighting something like the Uber Elder, then while this cluster up here might give you more sheet DPS as opposed to this down here, you have to consider that when you move around all the time to not get hit by the stuff, by the Uber Elder and the Shaper in there, then you want to still have as high charges as possible on your Winter Orb. If you have less duration, then you will have to stay still more often in order to keep up high enough charges to deal the most optimal damage. With increased duration cluster down here, it makes it so that you have to stay still less. It gives you more freedom to move around, and in practicality, in that fight at least, it gives you more damage over time. However, if you could just stay still, of course, and you didn't have to worry about a thing, then Arcane Potency is better up here. So when you're doing this, you just want to focus on getting the duration clusters, you want to focus on getting enough energy shield or high level content, and you want to of course have enough life so you don't get destroyed all the time. And then scale it via crit multi and spell damage, cold damage, and leave out the area of effect, at least in my opinion. The only nice thing there is to be said about increased area of effect is that it increases the area of effect for your Herald of Ash and Herald of Ice, but I haven't felt that it was needed per se. So let's talk about the gear, and that's really where this build becomes, I guess, a little more advanced, because there's a lot of small things you can improve with this that you ordinarily wouldn't really think about, and it's those things that have made it possible and made it so that this build eventually feels good late game. First of all, our priority here is to get enough energy shield to survive, of course. Then we want enough critical strike chains to fully utilize and make the Inquisitor Ascendancy efficient. And then we want enough reduced mana reservation so we can run all of the Heralds and Discipline. So if we start by just talking about the energy shield sustain, because this is by far the most important one of them. So as I said before, you need a high energy shield pool, right? But when you take a lot of damage, if you get swarmed or if you take some big hits, because of Mind Over Matter absorbing that, it's going to drain your energy shield pool very, very quickly. This is not really an issue against bosses. You want to get a Shaper base energy shield armor, and on that you want the recover of maximum energy shield on kill. This here makes it so that anytime you kill enemies, you get a ton of energy shield regen, or not regen, but a ton of energy shield recovered back, and it's very easy to sustain because you're constantly killing. As I said, it's not really against bosses, of course, you're not killing them, so you're not benefiting from the recover on that, but bosses are much easier to control because it's not like a million hits at the same time completely draining your energy shield pool, but rather something more controllable and in many cases also avoidable, etc. I haven't felt any specific need to deal with energy shield recovery on bosses, but when it sometimes can be an issue, you simply pop your Ball Discipline and you're good. You will be able to recover and you're fine. But it is against the small minions when there's like a million hits hitting you at the same time. But when you then kill a couple of these and they explode and such, your energy shield just comes right back and it's no issue at all. So that is your main priority for this type of build for endgame. If you want to run this, make sure you get recover, maximum energy shield on kill. You don't have to get 6%, but just make sure you get that affix at least. It's very useful. Then on top of that, it can also be very nice to just have the 120 energy shield regenerated per second while a rare unique enemy is nearby. Now 120 energy shield per second isn't that much when you have this type of energy shield pool, but let's say you get unlucky and you just get hit by an onslaught of monsters, then if your energy shield pool is low and you're fighting a boss and things get hectic, then the region here at least is going to make it so that you still will have enough to cast your Winter Orb, so you will get a couple of kills, which will allow the recover of 6% energy shield on kill then. And so the second priority, besides getting the energy shield sustain, is to get some heavy increases to critical strike chains, so that we can get high enough of critical strike chains to properly and efficiently make use of inevitable judgment, so we can ignore enemy monster elemental resistances. Now, when I put my character into Path of Building and take everything so it makes sense, my character has around 90% critical strike chains, which is pretty damn good for something like this here. We achieve that by, on the chest together with the recover we just talked about, then you also want to look for the spells have plus 1.4% to critical strike chains. Now this of course varies a little. You can go up to 1.5 and you can go down to 0.5, I believe. So you want the more the better, obviously. Since this is a flat increase to the base critical strike chains, it basically gives a ton of extra increased critical strike chains, because it allows everything else that scales critical strikes to scale off of that new base chains, if that makes any sense. So it makes a huge difference. Now on top of that, we also want to get something similar, but on our gloves. So with the Voidbringer gloves, which are just absolutely fantastic for this setup when all of these things are combined, if you get these corrupted, you have a chance of getting from, I actually don't know what the low roll is, but I think you can get up to like 1% even. I didn't find anything higher than 0.8, but maybe you will. Either way, this works similarly to the way this does here, except that this is not only for spells. And I know 0.8 doesn't sound like that much, but let me try and demonstrate this for you, because it is the base that is being increased, so it scales more efficiently. Let me show you how powerful it is. So just ignore the number here, because this is not what we actually have, but 66.5 is what it says right now. If we take off our gloves here, and the 0.8 to crit chains, then you can see it goes down to 49.8 and then back to 65.5. It is a huge critical strike chains increase, and it's pretty cheap to get, to be honest. Voidbringer gloves themselves don't really have much value. So you can just buy a ton of them and corrupt them until you get this mod here. Or you can of course look for one who's already selling them. Then besides that, the Voidbringer gloves are just so nice due to the level of socketed elemental gems for our heralds. It also gives increased critical strike chains to spells. You of course want to get that number as high as possible while staying within a reasonable budget. Energy shield, that's great for us. The increased mana cost of skills, you want to keep that number as low as possible, because obviously with these on, we can see the mana cost is 34 right now for Winter Orb. When we take them off, it's 21, so it's easier to sustain with a lower number of this, obviously. And then on top of this, it finishes off with the energy shield gain on kill, which makes it, together with the recover, very nice and very useful for sustaining when we take a lot of damage or is doing maps and such. So Voidbringers are absolutely fantastic for this. And then I'm of course using diamond rings. What, dude? Oh my god, I haven't blessed this one here. I'm using diamond rings for the implicit global critical strike chains. You want to get that to 30. And then with the new Veiled mods, you can get that increased global critical strike chains mod on it. And then together with that, it comes with 21% critical strike multiplier if you shattered an enemy recently. And even in boss fights, there's often a lot of minions running around, right? So you will be shattering, and it's a pretty damn big multiplier to be or to get activated there. So that's how you fix the critical strike chains. Voidbringer flat on this here, and diamond rings that has the proper implicit roll. Until you get proper critical strike chains, I'd say at least until, when you look up in your path of building, until you get to around 80, maybe 75, I would at least use a diamond flask and then leave out the dying sun flask. I also found that for increasing your survivability, if you can get yourself an amulet with the Wall Pact while focused and 10% of damage leached as life while focused, that is very, very useful when you're taking lots of damage. That doesn't necessarily one-shot you, but gives you a brief amount of time to recover from. This greatly speeds up that, and that's why we have the focus ability down here too. So when we focus for 4 seconds, we'll have the Wall Pact bonus here, and we'll be able to leech back our life much, much faster. In order to proc Onslaught, I've also used the new Veiled mod that gives movement speed first of all, but it also gives 9% chance to gain Onslaught for 4 seconds on kill. Alternatively, you could just get boots with higher movement speed and then get a couple of jewels with chance to gain Onslaught on kill too. That works. Finally, the weapon I'm using here, and I highly suggest that if you have the currency to do it, get yourself this. This is an insane damage increase once you get this up and rolling. So unless you get like really lucky and find something closely equivalent to this, then something like this here is amazing. It cost me around 2 exalts and let's say 20 KS approximately. You can either decide to use a golden crest or a platinum crest, or you can go with the scepter, and that should be the void scepter or the opal scepter. Daggers, they give increased critical strike chains, and the scepters give increased elemental damage. So it depends a little on how much crit change you already have. If you have enough crit change, you want to go with the scepters. But what you do is that you get yourself an item level 85 Shaper base golden crest or platinum crest, or one of the scepters. Then you transmute it, so you turn it magic, and then you roll it until you get a good roll of the gain 19% in this case of elemental damage is extra chaos damage. This is very important. This is super powerful. Then once you've done that, you regal it, and if you, unless you get super lucky and get a really good roll already, then you simply annul it after that, so it remains a rare weapon, but you only have the elemental damage, is extra chaos damage taken mod left. Then you multi-mod it. That's the expensive part of it. That's the 2 exalts, and then you put on whatever you desire for your setup. But for me, you can see it was spell damage, multiplier, and then the extra 17% of non-chaos damage is extra chaos damage, and then the trigger circuit spell when you use a skill. So this is kind of what I mean about this build not necessarily being that beginner friendly, because there is a lot of different mods that you want to try and get on the gear that you may not be too familiar with, and it's going to require a bit of investment on some of the things to really get it. But if you know how to go about it, it shouldn't be that expensive, but you have potential to really burn some currency if you don't know how to go about it. Yeah. Then I have the Blood of the Karui flask, which I recommend once you get above 6,000 health, because the Seething and Bubbling Divines just don't really cut it anymore. Before that, those are the ones I recommend. You have the Basalt Flask of Warding, so you can remove curses. You can also have bleed removal if you don't have a jewel that prevents you from taking extra damage from corrupted blood. Or you can have freeze removal too, but I found curse removal to be the most useful here. Then we use the Dying Sun Flask for more or 2 additional projectiles. It goes without explaining, that gives us more damage. And then Aetiri's Promise, so we gain 15% of elemental damages, extra chaos damage during effect. And then we get 2% of chaos damage leached as life during flask effect. Now the Aetiri flask here is absolutely amazing together with the weapon we then also had, because we got a lot of extra damage as chaos damage here. So the leech potential of Aetiri's Promise just becomes so much better if you get these rolls on your dagger. And then finally, a Surgeon's Quicksilver Flask of Adrenaline. I actually think, since we kill so much stuff either way, I think an Able Quicksilver Flask of Adrenaline is better, so you can have more charges on it. And since shield charge is influenced by the movement speed, I find the Adrenaline roll to be the best, but you do run into an issue where you have to either sacrifice the idea of being able to remove curses, freeze, or bleed on one of these things here, and that can be a little annoying. And I think this pretty much covers the build in its current setup. As for leveling, guys, I'm gonna be very reluctant to give you advice here, because it's been a long time since I've done this, and it's very different, the build now, as compared to what it was in the beginning. But the main thing you will have to worry about and take into consideration is how you're going to sustain your energy shield pool while using Mind Over Matter and Eldritch Battery. Because in the beginning you won't have access to the recover maximum energy shield on kill. I think you can get the energy shield regen pretty early on your belt, so try to get that as soon as possible. But you're probably best off going into Zealot's Oath for a big part of the leveling process, so that the life regen you have applies to energy shield instead, and you can sustain it that way. Then add like a cast when damage taken. For that setup, use a stone golem instead for the life regen, and it then applies to this. It's pretty efficient, but I can't really tell you when to make the switch. Again, this is why you need to not be a beginner when trying out this build, because you will need to be able to, for your character, to figure out for yourself when a good time would be to transition based on the amount of life, energy shield you have, the regen you have, and so forth. But I can tell you that for leveling skills I used Freezing Pulse until 12, I then went with Stormbrained until 28, and I actually switched to Winter Orb at 28, and I think that's perfectly fine if you want to do that, but you can level faster with the brains for a while. Then once, maybe if you get yourself like a tabular and then swap over when you have greater multiple projectiles at 38, right? I think that would be a great time to start using your Winter Orb for it. And I think that's what there is to say about this. And I think that's what there is to say about it. It's been such a fun build to play. Level 95, as you guys can see, and I rarely take a character to that level, but it's just been so damn fun. It's been great for bosses, it's been great for mapping, it's been great for mines. It takes many small things to get everything up and running, but once it does, it just works pretty damn well. If you try it out, I hope you have a great time with it. Again, please, new players, don't do this. You're not gonna have fun with it unless you have someone that helps you at least. Remember to subscribe for more content. Thank you for watching, and bros, do you even nerd?